Hello, everybody, and welcome to our show this evening. I have a couple of interesting guests for you, very interesting guests, and friends of the show. You may recognize them immediately from previous encounters, and that is Olgierd Uziemblo, who's joining us from the metropolis of Zambrów, perched on the edge of beautiful Podlasia, God's own country, created specially by him for his pleasure. And from another very interesting place, some say God also created it, but not if they're from the south, and that is Cape Cod, Massachusetts, with Patrick Patterson, who's on a little R&R after months of photo reporting and doing aid work in along the borders, based in Kiev, but along the borders up and down the length of the firing line in Ukraine. Hi, everybody. How are you?
Good morning. Good.
Still alive.
That's always a good day. That's how that I can't tell you, but those lines figure in my last book quite importantly. Being alive is always a good day. Patrick, you've been up for a while. We might as well get right into it. There was an attack on Kiev. The last time, a missile attack this morning. The last time we talked to you, you were reporting from the streets of Kiev in between missile attacks. Patrick, you were on the phone with people in Kiev this morning from Cape Cod. What were they saying to you?
Just there were loud explosions, and those all came without an air raid siren. And so there was a little bit of confusion on some of the reporting going out from local administration, saying that the sounds of the explosions were not from missiles. And then shortly after that, the air raid siren went off. So they were in fact from missiles that came in. That were not discovered on radar, which led which prevented the air alarm from sounding this morning.
So they came in. They came in under the radar, presumably, right?
They did.
What is that? That's something new. Certainly in attacks on Kiev, as far as I know. Is that your reading of it?
The only other time that's happened to me would be in Kharkiv, which I think is close enough to the front line that you sometimes would hear the explosions first, and then the air raid siren. Same goes for Kramatorsk, but for Kyiv, it's the first time that there's been a missile strike that I'm aware of that it did not. That came before the air raid siren.
Yeah. So what this means, presumably, is that these missiles were shot from pretty close in. Olgierd, do you have anything? You were the one who was telling me about this before we got Patrick on the line.
I don't know, just we were chatting, and that's what Patrick said. I was just wondering, they just launched this new ship, Admiral Gorshkov, loaded with zircons, which are the new missiles, supposedly hypersonic, supposedly too fast to be discovered. Perhaps they have some cloaking on them. And he's also to the north of Kiev, although I'm not sure what is the distance between the Northern Sea and Kiev and what is the actual distance of Zircon. So I don't know. Just wondering.
Could they be from Belarus? Patrick?
I know that there was confirmation that the military administration put out this morning on their official Telegram channel, stating that they were ballistic missiles and that they could not be intercepted. That they don't have the air defense for them. That was the only statement that they put out about the missiles.
Meaning that they're so fast that you don't have time to intercept them. The speed.
Correct, and they also don't show up on radar.
Yeah. So this is a new and disturbing development. Do we know how many missiles went in? I mean, this hadn't even turned up on the news by the time I came to the studio this morning.
They did hit a critical infrastructure along the banks of the Dnieper River, and then in the district that I'm in, relatively close to the flat, there were debris from a destroyed missile that scattered and causing like an industrial fire at a industrial complex. So there were no fatalities, no injuries that were being reported.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's all we've got for that right now. But Patrick, I wanted to mention one other thing. You said to me a few days ago that there was a train load coming in from Russia of some type of equipment or something, that you had heard about this. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, there was just there was reports coming in that I think it was like either a 40 or 44 wagon car or train cars from Russia arriving into Belarus with both Russian soldiers and supplies. They didn't indicate where those wagons were. They were just saying that those wagons had arrived in Belarus. So that was maybe I think like 4 days ago.
What's the feeling? Is Ukraine winning this war, Patrick? What's the feeling on the ground over there? Or are they? Is it stalemate? We talked about that previously as the prognosis for this year, stalemate. But what do you think?
You know, I mean, I'm certainly not a military expert or analyst.
What are people saying?
The general sense of, I mean, if you're in Ukraine, I think you feel like you've already won the war, in some regards, right? You've outlasted the 48 hours that I guess the world thought it would take for Russia to come in and take Kyiv. I think the general feeling is that yes, Ukraine's winning the war. I think I think there's kind of Bakhmut and just outside of Bakhmut is where the heaviest fighting is happening right now, and you know the new mobilization that's supposed to start this week. I think Putin wants over 1 million soldiers to be in play and ready to go, and I think that's hopeful for early spring.
That's a lot of men to mobilize so quickly. I think you're looking at a much longer period
I'm
of time.
talking about in total of having ready with the new mobilization of 500,000 more people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, this is the old Russian thing, isn't it? That, and perhaps Olgierd will have something to say on this, that their tradition is after the first few months of a war. For example, let's talk about the First World War, which is in many ways the disaster of the opening of the First World War. The Battle of Tannenberg is similar to what we've seen. Communication problems, getting food to the troops problems, ammunition to the troops problems, all of those things, and then massive losses. And that was just in the first month of August 1914. So the Russians are no strangers to losing a lot of people in the first few months to a year of a war, then starting this policy of attrition where they just throw men at the war and munitions, as we've seen, and often can take, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of casualties before they decide to stop. And one wonders if that's going to happen this time too. Or have they learned anything? It doesn't seem they have. This mobilization is a very interesting point. How are they going to train those people and supply those people, get them into the line, when Ukraine is the fulcrum on...
Have you guys heard that Russians actually changed the mobilization law, and they changed the age of mobilized, of people that are going to be called to arms? From they raised the age, or the minimal age, from 18 to 21, but at the moment, and for some time before the whole law goes, they also raised the age of the maximal age to 30 from 28. But at the moment,
Wow.
both laws are acting, so they're actually calling in people from 18 to 30.
Yeah,
And of course, there is no general mobilization order, because there was the first mobilization, and it was never called off officially, never.
okay.
And they actually stated they're not going to call it off because President said it's over. So it is over. And it was not.
You mean it right at the beginning, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, they figured they were going to overwhelm the Ukrainians, and they weren't welcome with flowers and chocolate candies, for which Ukraine is famous. They
Talking
were
about the First World
resisted.
War, sorry that I just a thought. First World War may be a good example because it ended with the complete falling apart of Tsarist Russia.
Yeah, well,
Even though they're
the October
throwing
Revolution.
more
Yeah,
all the time.
that's really true, and it's a point worth making. And I want to get into this later. I made a few notes, if you don't mind, about the sort of industrial position of Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine, and also what's been happening in terms of the war, what it means. Has Russia achieved objectives? What objectives have they achieved? And we might look at what's actually happening to Russia, because there are rumblings that Russia is, it was always some of the long-term forecasts, but there are new rumblings that Russia may be on the edge of disintegration yet again in a similar way. So it's a good, to 1917, so it's a good point you raised there, Olgierd. If we just look, everybody knows that this area was a huge industrial area. And Patrick, we're going to come back and ask you some stuff about being in the States, et cetera, but in the second half. I just wanted to get into this now. And some of your...
Air raid sirens just went off again right now in Kyiv. So
The second time.
Just now, yeah.
So this is like a replay of the last time we had you on, when you were in between air raids. Only this time you're safely tucked away on the Cape, which is good. Although I know you have mixed feelings, and we'll talk about that later in the second half. We're going to focus on that, on your observations being back in the States and taking a break from the front, which we haven't talked about on this program and all the ones we've done so far. So we're glad to have you to talk about that as much as you feel free to do. But if we're looking at, it seems to me that Russia is all in. I don't think that's a new thing to say, but it's worth emphasizing. Russia is all in on this war. This is make or break, to the point where they've even kidnapped a couple 100,000 children because they're running short of population by every estimation, not just them, but China too. The United States is in a much better, like it or not, situation, if only because of the rampant immigration in the United States. There's no shortage of people there. But Russia and China are looking at demographic catastrophe over the next 25 years by all the forecasts I'm seeing. But also, we have to look at the kind of resources that they have in the area of Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. Russia, this area, is first in producing natural gas, uranium, neon, processed nickel, semi-finished iron, wheat, fertilizer, and potash. And the potash and the fertilizer are very important because if we run out of fertilizer, that's going to add to, or the fertilizer declines, it already has, but if it keeps declining, it's going to be very expensive and also going to be hard to produce the food that's necessary. We could be looking at a mass starvation, not just hunger, but death on a huge scale because of this ridiculously ill-conceived invasion by Russia of Ukraine. And then there's a number of other things: platinum, copper, refined, steel, seed oils, ammonia, wood, even wood, coal. These are second and third tier. Gas turbines, titanium, platinum and titanium. A lot of the world's supply comes from this area. And of course, they're using the neon is used, isn't it neon that's used in making semiconductors? And if we run out of those, that has to do with all our technology. So there are a lot of problems. How are Ukrainians going to plant wheat and other crops for this year? It's a big question. And it seems that Russia is trying to stop Ukraine from being an agricultural producer and destroying their infrastructure at the same time. What can be the end game here, Olgierd or Patrick? What do you think might be the end game there? Just all this destruction. I mean, why do you want to take a country and destroy everything? Doesn't make any sense, does it? Olgierd?
Well, it seems to be a repetition of, I don't know, how was this war planned? Perhaps it was planned, as a lot of analysts say. It was planned as what Russians say in this discourse, a little winning war. So the little war that is going to bring a victory, a little victorious war, sorry, is going to bring victory and raise Putin in the eyes of his citizens. I have no idea whether they have planned it this way, but then again, the problem of Russia is once they are losing this war, they lock in the fight and they try to win by any means. And it brings, well, it brings what it brings: suffering for all the people involved, everyone involved. And that's only, since Russia does it almost every time, it calls into question the support of any Russian actions by the civilized world.
It also
that's my point.
Yeah, and it also calls into question the entire ethos of the country that operates in this way. We're not the first people to say that, but it's worth emphasizing, particularly now when we're looking at civilian casualties on the order of 500,000, perhaps. We don't know how many people died in Mariupol. 100,000, maybe?
And we will not know until Mariupol is back into Ukrainian hands, because Russians are trying to cover it up. And
yes.
We know that.
Well, that's what they did. That we have plenty of examples of the Russians committing mass murder and doing it before. What I'm suggesting, Patrick, is something I want to throw over to you now. What I'm suggesting is that the scale of ethnic, it's not gone beyond ethnic cleansing, genocide is vast and misunderstood at this point through not just murder but displacement of people. Kidnapping is a form of genocide too. You're looking at going on for 1 million people in a year who've either been killed, displaced, and more than that if you're talking about refugees. It is an extraordinary situation. Are people aware in Ukraine of these kind of personal losses? Or is it kept quiet? People don't know, they hold out hope? I'm wondering, because this is really a situation that is unparalleled even in the 20th century, to have so many people murdered, displaced so quickly.
No, they don't hide it. They're aware, and they're not surprised or shocked. And I think that was something that I learned very quickly being there, is that one of the first things that you can go to is the Great Famine, and Ukrainians are used to being treated this way from Russia. It's not new, and I think it's new for many Western people and people who are outside of that. But grandparents that still speak of the Great Famine, and
so I missed that last sentence. Could you repeat that?
No, there's people who are still living who have very fond memories of. I shouldn't use the word fond. They have memories of their grandparents speaking of the Great Famine and what that was like and the impact on them. And so,
poignant
in the scheme
memories,
of our world,
perhaps. Yeah.
You know, it's not long ago, and so
No.
They're used to Russia in their minds doing this. It's not out of the ordinary. It's not shocking to them. But yeah, they speak of it. They're aware of it. They're not shy in saying that. They know the impact on what's going on.
Very interesting. Really the history of the war to this point is the destruction of the war, of people, and infrastructure, industry, agriculture, and such a massive scale at such a late date in the 21st century.
I mean, the agricultural part alone, right?
Yeah.
So if you think about the demining process that's going to have to take place, and the amount of mines that are currently in these fields, that farmers are going to continue to die, even if the war stops today, years and years from now.
Yes, and people just randomly, is the case. Olgierd, you wanted to jump in right before the break. Why don't you take over?
Well, for me, it's terrible that there is still a lot of Russoversteiners in the West that are saying that it's all in the name of Russians' security. They need to feel secure so they can occupy all the surrounding countries. I really like the calculation recently that was made on, I believe it was on Joe Rogan's podcast, that in order for Russians to feel secure, they need to occupy another 200 million people worth of countries and control them. And I think that kind of thinking is a bit sick.
The point, yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you made that. I wanted to get to that at some point today. Because basically it means reestablishing the boundaries of the old Soviet Union, and that means...
And they do it at any cost, and that's the problem, because the cost they don't care about. Just like Stalin was doing the industrialization, at any cost.
And that includes Poland, don't forget. Okay, we'll come back. We'll come back where we left off, and maybe expand on that point, because that dovetails well into what I wanted to talk about. And then we're going to talk to Patrick a little more about his impressions being back in the States and viewing the war, which he's been intensely observing for a few months from afar. Okay, stay tuned, everybody. Thank you for watching. These messages are very, very important. Watch them. Right, we're back. Thank you for staying with us. I've got Patrick Patterson on Cape Cod in the United States, taking a break from the war. And we have Olgierd Uziemblo from Zambrów the beautiful metropolis of Zembrów. And as we went to break, we were talking about what Russia would need to feel secure in terms of territory, which is outlandish, and in terms of the population they have to control. But meanwhile, Patrick, you've had some news. What was it?
Yeah, just shortly a few minutes ago, the air alarm sounded, and then the reports just came out that there are inbound missiles currently in the air. Those missiles can change trajectory, so I'm not sure where they're headed, but there should be some people will start to feel those attacks shortly.
Right. So, and these are new missiles. Oh, well, these they saw coming in. First ones they didn't see coming in. These they've seen coming in. So maybe it's a different kind of missile. We don't know, do we? Yeah. But we can surmise that that may be the case. Okay. So, if you get any more messages, just chime in, Patrick. Maybe you'll get some text. Just let us know.
Okay.
Please just interrupt. Okay, so what we were talking about was Olgierd made this very good point from the Joe Rogan broadcast with, wasn't it Peter Zien who was on the broadcast?
I think so, yeah.
Who's a geopolitical strategist that I think anyone who watches the internet and is interested in these subjects will know him. And he also has a new book out called The End of the World, or something close to that, which is setting out global strategy. Well, what will happen, his strategic view of what will happen regarding major powers, and over the next 10 to 25 years. And he focuses on the war. And one of the things he was saying is that let's go through it carefully. Anyone Polish knows this. Anyone Central European knows this. Anyone who's been in the who lived under the Soviet Union knows this. But a lot of young people may not be aware. And a lot of people who are not really sure that Paris is in France might be confused as well. So let's slowly go over what this means. For Russia to feel safe, they need a buffer, not just of Poland and Belarus, Georgia down in the Caucasus, flirting with Armenia as well, which is next to Georgia, to the south of it. They also need the Baltics eventually, don't they, to plug up any points of invading Russia. So that's the paranoia. And then they would need all of the stands, right? So, which is a number of, 6, 7, 8 countries over there. If you count Kyrgyzstan, what is it, 7 countries. So this population is 1.5 times greater than the population of the Soviet Union. Of Russia. It would be close to the population of the old Soviet Union. And they couldn't even take Ukraine. But yet this seems to remain a strategy. I mean, whatever happened to the good old days when American business, and after 1991, went into Russia and said, okay, we're going to be partners with you and build your country and your economy up. Whatever happened to those days that we now find us in a situation where a desperate Russia wants to rebuild the Soviet Union and may resort, because their population is declining, they're losing this war, their equipment's out of date, their nuclear weapons may just explode on them, may have to resort to a sort of nuclear alternative because they can't win this particular war. So the question is, what do we do? I mean, it looks like we're winning this thing, but if Russia disintegrates, what happens next? Right? This has to be the question that we're looking at. Nobody knows that answer. But this is the most dangerous point that we've been at in our lifetimes. This is the most dangerous point that the world has been at since the invention of the atom bomb. And it's not going away. And I suppose it doesn't help to get out the world's smallest violin and play it, but I think it needs a lot more attention than what's being given to it, particularly in the United States. And people need to pull, you know, their socks up, and the quarreling needs to stop. Patrick, what is your sense of being back in the States? What's it like after having spent so much time on the war front?
It's a little surreal. I think from a information standpoint, you quickly start to realize that I've gone from being inundated with the constant news and propaganda of what's happening in Ukraine, and quickly realize here in the U.S. that it appears that they're just blurbs on the news. And it's so incredibly difficult to think of what's actually happening right now in Ukraine and how little attention is focused on that here. You know, you still walk same as you'll see in Poland when you walk by businesses or homes that have the Ukrainian flag flying, saying we support Ukraine. But you know, I'm still kind of trying to understand what that transition is and how to process being here. It's you know, very little sleep. You know, you start to understand that you don't have to live on that constant high of adrenaline and trying to be always hyper vigilant, and that starts to kind of come down and come out of you. And you know, it has an impact and toll on your body. And you know, once this war ends, there's going to be millions of people in Ukraine that are going to have to face that, who are living under constant hypervigilance and have been for almost a year. But my sense of being in the U.S. is that you know, we're paying attention to what's happening in our Congress. We're paying attention to this Congress person that created, you know, false information to get elected. Who cares? Like, we need to have our focus shifted on so many other things. You know, Ukraine just being one of those.
It's an interesting point, because when Britain had an empire, they were very much focused on the running of it and what was the managerial class to run it. What was going on throughout the empire was everyday news. I mean, it was front page news. Local British politics was important too, but mostly as to how it related to running the empire. Now, the United States is the imperial power, but it seems to be very historically reluctant power, except where business is concerned. We're always very happy, the United States is always very happy to go abroad and make business partnerships and create trading relationships and keeping the sea lanes open and things like that, the airways open too. But there seems to be this lack of understanding and desire, which is a long-term complaint. So I've been hearing it all my life.
Excuse me to interrupt really quick.
Yeah.
Well, there are 10 rockets inbound currently to Kyiv right now.
10 rockets coming in. Okay. So we'll wait to see what happens with that. The point is now, with the world so connected with technology, it is even more important for the leading country to be stable within against the chaos without. Because if the United States is not in this position of leadership, Europe's in trouble, and in fact, the world is in trouble, because who fills the vacuum? who fills the vacuum? There's no one else. This is
Yes, there is.
Who?
China.
I knew you might say that. As a sinologist, expand, please.
No, I don't know. It's as if USA is kind of a reluctant swordsman. There was this book, but they've done kind of a fantasy book about the swordsman that didn't want to take up his responsibilities. He was reluctant, and he suffered for that. But the world was saved in the end. But on the other hand, I don't know what's going to happen here, because I think it's a different situation. You might see it really clearer from the American perspective. I guess a perspective in Cape Cod is different from Washington. I don't know. Patrick, how is it? Do you think there are different perspectives on that in the U.S.?
Yeah, I do.
Because I was really scared by seeing what Tucker Carlson says.
Well, yeah, because he's yeah. Go ahead, Patrick. Anyway, go ahead.
No. This has been going on for years, right? We've been slowly leading up to this, where and then you hit January 6th with what happened with the storming of the Capitol, and then you look at, was it in Brazil? Like the world is changing so quickly, and I think it's almost as people are changing so quickly, and it doesn't give me great hope or optimism of where we'll be in 50 years as a world. With technology, we've been forced to become a global world. And I think that requires to have global citizens. And I think we're going to have to adapt to looking at ourselves more as global citizens versus I'm from the U.S. and you're from Poland. I think until we do that, we're gonna live in this constant vacuum of unknowns and uncertainties.
Well, I think
I must tell you, I was always very, very strongly supportive of the space programs, because this is one of the things that puts the whole globe, the people, aware that there is something outside that we can reach out to. And I was really sad when US started canceling the space program, because that is something that gives us a possibility of thinking outside the globe. In other words, to make globe our own thing, not separate little countries, but one thing. But it doesn't happen. It is not happening. Russia is making the Russian space program. China is making its own imperialist space program. The countries stop cooperating in space. It's very sad what is developing right now.
I couldn't agree more with that point. And I was discussing that with someone earlier this week, that why did we stop the space program? It's never made sense to me. And you get to the moon, the next thing you want to do is put a base on the moon, not stop. And the shuttle program never really came to anything. You're orbiting around the Earth, but this is not advancing. It's advancing technology to some extent, but it's not advancing exploration. And I mean, the moon, we still know so little about what it's even made of. We have an idea, but we're not really sure. This is a unifying thing. And if you can remember those days of the 70s, 80s, when the thing was taking place, the trips to the moon and the development of the shuttle, it was a wondrous time to be a kid, I can tell you. And it was amazing to think that we were doing these things, and very disappointing that it stopped and was replaced by creating better SUVs or something. Not against SUVs, but it seems rather lame. Comfort seemed to be the thing that took precedence, and the stock market over goals that we could look to together as human beings, like the space race, which is the epitome. That's a very good point. And it's exactly the antidote to the sort of thing that's going on now, which is primitive medieval thinking. Not that all medieval thinking was primitive, but the worst of it was horrible and brutal. And, you know, is it an accident that we've seen a crazed response to an epidemic, both by authorities and by people who were protesting, as well as a war following immediately? I think it is a symptom of things breaking
You
down.
know what? Sorry, I just had a thought. Well,
Please.
I would really love to have Patrick on Russian main TV telling that Americans really don't give a flying oil bar,
Jehoshaphat.
about what is happening in Ukraine. They don't care about that war. That war is not the main concern in U.S. because all Russia is fighting against you guys, not even us. Polish are just, you know, lackeys. The Anglo-Saxons are the main enemy. You realize that?
Yes, Russia currently feels like they're at war with us right now, 100%.
With the Anglo-Saxon world, as they put it, which includes which countries? I mean, it includes...
I'm sorry to hurt you, but you are also
the Anglosphere.
gay, genetically manipulated, and some other things I will not call you on air.
There was a recent interview in Russia. This film crew went around asking younger Russians what they feel about the war. But some of the people they interviewed were, you know, middle-aged people, and they truly feel that the U.S. It almost sounds like the reverse of what we feel of Russia, where people aren't getting, you know, they don't have food, they don't have proper roads, all these things that we can associate of maybe what Russia is outside of St. Petersburg or Moscow. They're looking at the U.S. The same way, where we don't have food for our citizens, and we don't have an economy, and our roads are poor, and all these same things that we may view Russians and quite frankly, all the things that I hear Ukrainians speak of about Russia are exactly what Russia on these interviews were saying about the U.S. and the U.S. citizens.
Gosh,
I've been to Russia, I've been to Siberia, so what they are saying about Russia is not made up. They don't have even proper roads on the far reaches of Siberia. They have ground roads, not proper roads.
Dirt roads. Yeah, and that's why they have this extensive rail network, isn't it? Because they have to move
And that rail
things.
is not that good.
Yeah, even so. Yeah, even so. Well, we're running down to the last few minutes, and I want to thank you both for being here today. I appreciate it. It's always good to see you both. I wish I could have you here in the studio and we could go to lunch afterwards and continue our conversation. Patrick, have you got any more news from Kiev?
I know that there's explosions just now in Odessa.
I always feel for Odessa. I really like that city.
It's a beautiful city, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh man, I'd pick Dnipro over Odessa.
Would you? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Even though there's an ocean.
Travel recommendation. Yeah. Well, there's a sea. Yeah. Patrick, what are your plans for the next, for the rest of the time, the rest of this month, or however long you're going to be in the United States?
You know, I'm spending some time writing. I'm spending some time kind of having a space to put my work together, and trying to adjust for the time that I'm here. It's challenging. It's hard. You know, this is.
What's the toughest part?
I'm not some veteran war correspondent, right? This is the first time I've put myself in this position, and I didn't come and go every 2 weeks, or only spend a couple weeks and leave. I spent almost 5 consecutive months there, and that's my fourth trip being there. So, for the past 7 months, this is what my life has been. And you come back here, and I had some man. I guess he thought I had a yield sign, and my first day back, I'm just driving normally, and this man just pulls up next to me and just berating me, and I'm just thinking to myself, like, man, this is my first day back, and like the privilege and the conversations that people are having around me, and it's like, man, you just don't understand how wonderful you have it. And then I look at our response during COVID with restaurants and businesses, and I compare it to what I've seen in Ukraine, driving from Kyiv to Dnipro with complete blackouts, and what business is willing to do to stay open with generators, with candles, with saying, sorry, we can't run your credit card, it's going to be cash. People are staying open, and that's a resilience that I think our bureaucracy in the United States would get in the way. Businesses have been allowed to just do what they need to do to stay afloat.
Talking about the resilience.
We're into the last few seconds now, Olgierd. Make it quick.
Okay, a story from our university. We had a lecture by Ukrainian professor from Kiev, and he was talking to us on the generated electricity and borrowed Starlink, on Chinese, a lecture on Chinese poetry, between the air raids, just like you did with us the last time. Between the air raids, Chinese poetry. I think it sums it up.
Thank you very much. What a good ending on both of you. And I want to thank both of you for your brilliant comments and moving testimony from Patrick about what's going on and his feelings about it. Okay, that's all we've got for this show. Let's give Godspeed to the people in Kiev and other cities who are under attack yet again, and to Ukrainians in general, and to us, because they need us and our help. Okay? Thanks everybody for watching. Patrick Patterson in Cape Cod and Olgierd Uziemblo in beautiful Podlasia.